The year was 2847, and humanity was dying. Not slowly, not quietly, but in fire and blood across 100 burning worlds. The Dominion had been hunting humans for 30 years, pushing them back system by system, colony by colony, until only 12 worlds remained under human control. Admiral Jake stood on the bridge of his damaged cruiser, the USS Horizon, and watched another planet die. The colony of New Haven had been home to 3 million people just 6 hours ago. Now it was nothing but smoke and ash. Plasma bombardment had turned cities into craters and forests into wastelands. The enemy fleet of 200 warships hung in orbit like vultures waiting for their meal to stop breathing. Jake was 52 years old, and he had been fighting this war since he was 23. He had watched his father die at the Battle of. He had lost his wife during the evacuation of Station. He had buried more friends than he could count. And now he was watching another world fall because humanity simply did not have the ships, the weapons, or the technology to stop the advance. His communications officer, a young woman named Amy Porter, looked up from her station with tears in her eyes. She had family on New Haven. She did not need to say anything. Jake understood. He had learned long ago that words meant nothing in moments like this. All he could do was put his hand on her shoulder and let her know she was not alone. The Horizon limped away from the battle zone with 3 other surviving ships. They had tried to defend the colony. They had failed. It was a story that had repeated itself too many times over the past 3 decades. 6,000 light-years away, on Earth, a very different kind of discovery was about to change everything. Dr. Kate had spent 15 years studying ancient human history, not the history that everyone knew, the rise of civilization in Mesopotamia and Egypt, the empires of Rome and China, the age of exploration and industry. She studied what came before, the traces and hints of something older, the anomalies that mainstream archaeology preferred to ignore. Deep beneath the Appalachian Mountains, her team had found something impossible. Ground-penetrating radar had revealed a massive underground cavern that should not exist. The rock formations around it were wrong. The mineral deposits made no sense, and the faint energy readings coming from within every law of physics that Kate knew. It took her team 3 months to dig their way inside. When they finally broke through the last wall of stone and shined their lights into the darkness beyond, Kate fell to her knees and wept. The cavern was enormous. It stretched for miles in every direction, carved with perfect precision from the living rock. But that was not what made Kate cry. What made her cry was the ship. It sat in the center of the cavern like a sleeping giant, 8 kilometers long from bow to stern. Its hull was made of a metal that their instruments could not identify. Strange symbols covered its surface, symbols that looked almost like letters, almost like words, almost like something that humans should be able to read but could not quite understand. Lieutenant Commander Price was the military liaison assigned to the dig site. He was a practical man, a soldier who believed in things he could see and touch and shoot. But when he walked into that cavern and saw that ship, even he felt something he could not explain. It was like coming home to a house he had never lived in. It was like remembering a dream he had never dreamed. He called Earth Defense Command immediately. Within hours, the president of the United Earth Coalition arrived with a team of scientists, engineers, and enough security personnel to fight a small war. President Nancy Griffin was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had held humanity together through the darkest years of the war, refusing to surrender even when surrender seemed like the only option. When she saw the ancient vessel, her first question was simple and direct. "Can we use it?" Kate did not know, but she was determined to find out. The team spent 3 days searching for a way inside the ship. They tried cutting through the hull with plasma torches. The metal did not even get warm. They tried hacking into external ports with their most advanced computers. The ports did not respond. They tried everything they could think of, and nothing worked. On the fourth day, Kate made a decision. She had noticed that certain symbols on the hull seemed to react when humans got close to them. They glowed faintly, almost imperceptibly, as if recognizing something in the people nearby. She had a theory, a crazy theory, but she had nothing left to lose. She walked up to the main entrance, a massive door that had resisted every attempt to open it, and she placed her palm flat against the ancient metal. She closed her eyes and simply stood there, waiting, hopping, praying to whatever gods might be listening. The ship woke up. Lights flickered to life across the hull. The symbols began to glow with a warm, golden light. The door slid open without a sound, revealing a corridor that stretched into the heart of the vessel. And a voice spoke, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The voice spoke in a language that Kate did not understand, but somehow felt familiar. It was like hearing a song she had known as a child and forgotten. Then the voice paused as if thinking, and when it spoke again, it spoke in perfect modern English. "Welcome home, children of Terra. I am Guardian, the caretaker of this vessel. You are aboard the sovereign flagship of the Terran Ascendancy. I have been waiting for you for 50,000 years." Kate could not speak. Price could not move. President Griffin simply stared at the open door with an expression that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. Guardian continued speaking, explaining things that sounded like myths and legends. Long ago, before the Ice Ages, before recorded history, humanity had ruled half the galaxy. They had built an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds. They had developed technology that could reshape planets and tear holes in the fabric of space itself. And then something had happened, something terrible, and they had chosen to hide, to forget, to start again from nothing, and wait for the day when they would be ready to reclaim their heritage. That day had finally come. The Sovereign was not just a ship. It was a weapon, a fortress, a symbol of everything humanity had once been and could be again. Its weapons could destroy fleets. Its shields could withstand the firepower of entire armadas. Its engines could cross the galaxy in days instead of months. President Griffin listened to Guardian's explanation and made a decision that would change the course of history. She turned to Price and gave him a simple order. "Find Admiral, tell him we have a new flagship, tell him the war is about to change." And so it began. Admiral Jake had seen many strange things during his 30 years of war. He had watched dreadnoughts tear through human defense lines like paper. He had witnessed entire planets reduced to rubble in hours. He had held dying soldiers in his arms and promised them that their sacrifice meant something, even when he was not sure it did. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of the Sovereign. The shuttle carrying him from Earth orbit descended into the underground cavern, and Jake pressed his face against the viewport like a child seeing the ocean for the first time. The ancient filled his vision, impossibly large, impossibly beautiful, impossibly real. 8 kilometers of gleaming metal that seemed to drink in the light and reflect it back as something warmer, something almost alive. President Griffin met him at the landing pad. She looked tired, but there was a fire in her eyes that Jake had not seen in years. She did not waste time on pleasantries. She took him directly to the bridge of the Sovereign, and that was when Jake understood that everything was about to change. The bridge was enormous, designed for a crew of hundreds but currently occupied by only a few dozen scientists and engineers. Holographic displays showed star maps that included systems Jake had never heard of. Control panels glowed with symbols that shifted and changed as if responding to the thoughts of the people nearby. And at the center of it all stood a pedestal where a soft blue light pulsed like a heartbeat. Guardian spoke from that light, introducing himself to the Admiral with the patience of something that had waited 50,000 years and could wait 50,000 more. The artificial intelligence explained the ship's capabilities in simple terms that Jake could understand, and with each new revelation, Jake felt the weight on his shoulders grow lighter. The Sovereign carried weapons called void lances that could tear holes in space itself. Anything caught in those holes simply ceased to exist, pulled into a dimension from which nothing could return. The ship's shields operated on principles that bent reality around the hull, making it nearly impossible for conventional weapons to find their target. The engines could fold space, allowing the vessel to travel anywhere in the galaxy without using the hyperspace lanes that limited modern ships. And there was more. The Sovereign carried 5,000 strike craft in its hangars, fighters and bombers designed for a war that had been fought before human civilization began. It could manufacture its own ammunition, repair its own damage, and generate enough power to supply a small planet. It was, in every sense, a weapon designed to win wars single-handedly. Jake turned to President Griffin and asked the only question that mattered: when can we launch? The answer was not what he wanted to hear. The ship had been dormant for 50. Many of its systems needed to be restored, recalibrated, and tested. The crew needed to be trained on technology that made their modern ships look like children's toys. Guardian estimated 6 months before the Sovereign would be ready for combat. 6 months was a long time in a war they were losing, but Jake had not survived 30 years of fighting by being impatient. He accepted the timeline and began the work of building his crew. Captain Lisa became his executive officer. She was 41 years old and had commanded 3 different vessels during the war, losing all of them to attacks but never losing her nerve. She had a reputation for tactical brilliance and a temper that could melt steel. Jake needed both. Commander Hayes took over as Chief Weapons Officer. He was young, only 32, but he had more combat experience than officers twice his age. His family had been killed during the fall of Colony 7, and he had spent every day since then looking for a way to make the pay. The Void Lances gave him that way. Engineer Chief led the restoration team. He was a genius with machines, capable of fixing anything with enough time and enough coffee. Guardian seemed to like him, often engaging him in long conversations about engineering principles that left grinning like a kid in a candy store. Dr. Kate insisted on joining the crew as the ship's archaeological advisor. She believed there were still secrets hidden in the Sovereign's computer systems, secrets that might prove crucial in the battles to come. Jake agreed, partly because she was right and partly because she had been the one to wake the ship up. That connection might matter. Price commanded the Marine contingent, 3,000 soldiers who would handle boarding actions and ground combat. He trained his people hard, pushing them to learn the ancient weapons and armor that the Sovereign provided. The Marines took to it quickly, discovering that the old equipment was lighter, stronger, and more effective than anything they had used before. The 6 months passed faster than Jake expected. Every day brought new discoveries, new capabilities, new reasons to hope. Guardian proved to be an excellent teacher, patient with those who struggled and encouraging to those who excelled. The crew began to feel like a family, bound together by the shared experience of learning to fly a ship that should have been impossible. Meanwhile, the war continued. It took 3 more human systems during those 6 months. Billions more people died or fled as refugees. The enemy grew bolder with each victory, convinced that humanity's final defeat was only a matter of time. Supreme Commander, the leader of the invasion force, had never lost a campaign in 400 years. He had conquered 87 species and destroyed 43 civilizations. Humanity was simply the next entry on a very long list. He expected the war to be over within a year, 2 at most. He had no idea what was coming. On the day the Sovereign was declared ready for combat, Jake stood on the bridge and looked at his crew. These men and women had trained harder than any soldiers in human history. They had learned to operate technology that their ancestors had built before the pyramids existed. They were ready. President Griffin's voice came through the communication system, broadcast to every human world simultaneously. She spoke of hope and courage, and the long struggle that had brought them to this moment. She spoke of the ancestors who had left this gift for their descendants. She spoke of the future that humanity would build when the war was finally won. And then she gave the order, launch the Sovereign. The Ancient rose from Earth for the first time in 50,000 years. Its engines hummed with power that made the air itself vibrate. Its hull gleamed in the sunlight as it climbed through the atmosphere and into the void beyond. Every human in the Sol system watched, holding their breath, hopping and praying that this was not a dream. Jake looked at the stars on his and smiled. For 30 years he had been fighting a losing war. For 30 years he had watched humanity retreat, suffer, and die. But today was different. Today was the first day of a new era. The Sovereign jumped toward the front lines, folding space around itself and vanishing in a flash of light. Destination: the supply base at station. Mission: to show the enemy that humanity was no longer running. Admiral Jake was going to war, and this time he intended to win. Commander had served the Dominion for 200 years. He had participated in the conquest of 30 species and had personally overseen the destruction of 12 civilizations. He was not a creature that knew fear. Fear was for the weak, for the conquered, for the soon-to-be dead. But when his sensors detected the vessel emerging from folded space near station, felt something cold crawl down his spine. The ship was enormous, 8 kilometers of sleek metal that seemed to absorb his sensor beams rather than reflect them. His tactical computers could not identify its design. His weapons officers could not achieve target lock. His communications specialists could not intercept any signals. The vessel simply hung there in space, silent and patient, waiting. Commanded 60 warships at station. 60 vessels crewed by the finest warriors in the Dominion, equipped with weapons that had crushed every enemy they had ever faced. He should have felt confident. Instead, he felt a growing sense of dread that he could not explain. The unknown ship began launching smaller craft from its hangars. Hundreds of them at first, then thousands. They poured out like angry insects from a disturbed hive, forming into attack wings with precision that pilots could not match. His sensors counted over 2,000 fighters before they stopped trying to keep track. Opened a channel to the unknown vessel. He demanded identification, surrender, and submission to Dominion authority. The response came imperfect, spoken by a voice that sounded almost amused. "This is Admiral Jake of the Earth vessel Sovereign. We are here to liberate this station and destroy your fleet. You have 60 seconds to surrender unconditionally. After that, we will show you no mercy." Laughed. One ship, no matter how large, could not defeat 60 warships. He gave the order to attack. That was his last mistake. The Sovereign fired its void lances for the first time in 50,000 years. 3 beams of absolute darkness shot across space, striking 3 battlecruisers simultaneously. The ships did not explode. They did not break apart. They simply vanished, pulled into tiers in reality that sealed behind them as if they had never existed. Watched his tactical display in horror as 3 of his largest ships disappeared from existence in less than a second. Before he could issue new orders, the Sovereign fired again. 3 more ships vanished. Then 3 more. The void lances carved through his fleet like a blade through soft flesh. Commander Hayes stood at his weapons console on the Sovereign's bridge, directing fire with cold efficiency. Each shot was precise, each target carefully selected. He felt nothing but satisfaction as he watched ships die. For every vessel he destroyed, he thought of the billions of humans those ships had killed. For every tier in space he created, he imagined the faces of his family burning on Colony 7. Captain Lisa coordinated the fighter wings with the skill of a master conductor leading an orchestra. The ancient strike craft were faster, more maneuverable, and better armed than anything the could field. Human pilots who had trained for months in simulators now flew in actual combat, and they found that the reality was even better than the simulations had promised. Enemy interceptors fell by the dozens, then by the hundreds. They tried to concentrate their fire on the Sovereign, Plasma bolts and missile salvos streaked toward the ancient vessel from every direction. None of them hit. The ship's shields bent reality around the hull, causing weapons to pass through spaces that were not quite there. To the attacking ships, it looked like their weapons were hitting the target. But the Sovereign remained untouched, unmarked, undamaged. Admiral watched the battle unfold with a calm that surprised even himself. After 30 years of losing, he was finally winning. After 30 years of watching his people die, he was finally making the enemy pay. The weight of all those losses, all those defeats, all those broken promises to dying soldiers seemed to lift from his shoulders as ships burned and vanished around him. Ordered a retreat. His remaining ships turned and tried to flee toward the hyperspace lanes that would carry them to safety. The Sovereign followed, its engines folding space faster than they could run. There was no escape. There was no mercy. There was only the cold mathematics of war, and those mathematics had finally turned in humanity's favor. The Battle of Station lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, 53 warships had been destroyed and 7 had surrendered. The supply base was captured intact, providing humanity with enough weapons and fuel to supply their fleet for months. And not a single human life had been lost. Jake recorded a message for broadcast across all human worlds. He kept it simple and direct. Today we showed that humanity will not die quietly. Today we showed them what happens when they push us too far. Today was just the beginning. We are coming for everything they have taken from us. We are coming, and we will not stop until every human world is free. The message spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. On refugee ships and resistance outposts, on hidden colonies and occupied worlds, humans heard the news and wept with joy. For the first time in a generation, they had hope. For the first time in 30 years, they believed they might actually survive. Supreme Commander receives final transmission before the commander's ship vanished into a void lance tier. He watched the tactical recordings over and over, studying the ancient human vessel and its impossible weapons. His advisors suggested that the ship must have limited ammunition, that the shields would eventually fail, that the Dominion simply needed to attack in greater numbers. Disagreed. He had not lived 400 years by underestimating his enemies. This vessel was something different, something dangerous, something that could threaten not just his invasion force but the Dominion itself. He needed to destroy it, and he needed to destroy it quickly, before the humans learned to build more ships like it. He sent orders to every fleet under his command. Abandon all current campaigns. Recall all reserves. Converge on human space with maximum force. The Supreme Commander was assembling the largest military operation in Dominion history. He would bring 6,000 warships against this ancient relic. He would overwhelm it with sheer numbers. He would crush humanity once and for all. But first, he needed to buy time. He needed to slow the human advance while his fleets gathered. And for that, he had a special weapon, something he had been saving for a moment exactly like this. Deep in the heart of the Dominion, in a vault that had been sealed for 3 centuries, an ancient horror began to wake. Had hoped he would never need to use it, but desperate times required desperate measures. If he could not defeat humanity with ships, he would defeat them with terror. The war was about to enter a new and darker phase, and neither side was truly prepared for what was coming next. 3 months after the Battle of Station, humanity was no longer a dying species. The Sovereign had liberated 12 occupied colonies, destroyed over 200 warships, and captured enough enemy technology to revolutionize human engineering for centuries. Admiral Jake had become the most famous human in the galaxy, his face appearing on screens and posters across every free world. But Guardian was worried, and that worried Jake more than anything else. The ancient artificial intelligence had access to databases that contained information about that no living human possessed. It knew things about the Dominion that the enemy themselves had forgotten, and what it knew was terrifying. The you have been fighting are merely a frontier garrison, Guardian explained to Jake during one of their private briefings. The true might of the Dominion has not yet been deployed. They command over 10,000 capital ships and a population of 800 billion across 400 conquered worlds. What you have faced so far is less than 5% of their total military strength. Jake absorbed this information in silence. He had known the Dominion was large, but he had not realized just how large. The victories of the past 3 months suddenly seemed much smaller, much less significant. They had been fighting the enemy's leftovers, and they had barely managed to win. Guardian continued with more bad news. Supreme Commander is assembling a grand fleet, unlike anything the Dominion has deployed in 1,000 years. Our intelligence suggests he will bring at least 2,000 capital ships against the Sol system within the next 2 months. The Sovereign is powerful, but it cannot defeat that many enemies alone. Dr. Kate had been spending every free moment searching through the Sovereign's historical archives. She had found records of the Terran Ascendancy's greatest victories, detailed technical specifications for weapons that made the Void Lances look primitive, and fragments of a story that both fascinated and frightened her. The Terran Ascendancy had not simply disappeared. They had fought a war against an enemy so terrible that victory seemed impossible. Rather than face extinction, they had chosen to hide themselves, to seal away their technology and start fresh, to become primitive again and wait for the day when they would be strong enough to return. The Sovereign was designed to be the seed of that return, a ship that could awaken humanity's lost heritage when the time was right. But the ship's full capabilities were locked. Guardian could not access them without command codes that had been hidden somewhere in the vessel's vast computer systems. Kate had been searching for those codes for 3 months without success. The situation grew more desperate with each passing day. Raiders attacked human supply lines. Occupied colonies were punished for the rebellion, their populations massacred as a warning to others. And the Grand Fleet continued to gather, thousands of warships converging on a single point in space like a fist preparing to strike. President Griffin called an emergency summit of all human military and political leaders. The meeting was held aboard the Sovereign, in a conference room that could seat 500 people. Representatives from every remaining human world attended, along with ambassadors from species that had quietly been resisting rule for generations. The rebels were the first to offer help. Their species had been conquered by the Dominion 2 centuries ago, and they had been fighting for freedom ever since. They could provide 200 warships, old vessels held together with hope and determination, but crewed by soldiers who would rather die than live under rule. The resistance joined next. They were a peaceful species by nature, artists and philosophers rather than warriors. But the Dominion had killed 80% of their population and turned the survivors into slaves. They had learned to fight out of necessity, and they brought 100 ships to the Alliance. Even the neutral collective offered support. They could not officially join the war without violating treaties that protected their, but they could send 50 medical ships to help with casualties. It was not much, but it was something. Jake looked at the numbers and felt his heart sink. 400 Allied ships against 2,000 vessels. The odds were still hopeless. Even with the Sovereign's incredible weapons, they could not kill enemies fast enough to prevent being overwhelmed. Lisa had a different perspective. We do not need to destroy them all, she pointed out during the strategy session. We just need to hold them long enough for something to change. Wars are not won by killing every enemy soldier. They are won by breaking the enemy's will to fight. Hayes disagreed. The will not break, he argued. They have been conquering species for 1,000 years. They do not know how to lose. We need to kill them all, every single ship, or they will just keep coming. The debate continued for hours without resolution. Jake listened to every opinion, weighed every argument, and found himself unable to choose a path forward. For the first time since discovering the Sovereign, he felt the cold touch of despair. Kate interrupted the meeting with news that changed everything. She had found something in the archives, not the command codes she had been searching for, but a message. A recording left by the last commander of the Terran Ascendancy 50,000 years ago. The recording showed a woman in an admiral's uniform, tired but determined, standing on a bridge that looked remarkably similar to the Sovereign's. She introduced herself as Admiral Wells, and she spoke directly to whoever might be watching in the distant future. If you are seeing this, then humanity has found its way back to the stars. I am proud of you, whoever you are. I wish I could be there to help you, but the enemy we face cannot be defeated with the forces we have. We have chosen to hide, to wait, to give our descendants a chance to grow strong enough to finish what we started. The Sovereign is more than a warship. It is a siege ship, designed to rebuild our civilization if all else fails. Its true capabilities are locked behind safety protocols that I have hidden in this message. But be warned. Using the ship's full power comes at a great cost. The Sovereign will save you, but it will not survive the process. The recording continued with technical details and historical context, but Jake focused on one simple fact. The ship could save humanity. It would cost them the Sovereign, but it could save them. He looked at his officers, his allies, his friends. He saw fear in some faces, hope in others, and determination in all of them. They had come so far, sacrificed so much, and fought so hard. They deserved to know the truth. We have a choice, Jake said quietly. We can fight with what we have and probably lose. Or we can unlock the Sovereign's true power, save our species, and lose the ship that made it all possible. I will not make this decision alone. We decide together as a crew, as an alliance, as a people. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would live, whatever the cost. Now all they had to do was survive long enough for Kate to find the activation codes. And according to their intelligence reports, the Grand Fleet would arrive at Sol in less than 48 hours. The final battle was about to begin. The Grand Fleet emerged from hyperspace on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. 2,000 capital ships, 10,000 support vessels, and 300 million soldiers appeared in the outer reaches of the Sol system like a dark cloud swallowing the stars. It was the largest military force the Dominion had ever assembled against a single enemy. Supreme Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the human defensive formation on his tactical display. 400 ships arranged in a sphere around there, with the Ancient at the center. They were outnumbered 5-1 and out of options. Allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had studied every recording of the Sovereign's previous battles. He had analyzed every tactic, every weapon, and developed countermeasures for every known capability. His ships would attack in rotating waves, preventing the humans from concentrating their fire. His electronic warfare specialists would jam their communications. His infiltration teams would target the engines with suicide runs. The humans had surprised him once. They would not surprise him again. Jake looked at the sea of red icons on his display and felt surprisingly calm. He had known this moment was coming. He had prepared for it as best he could. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine the fate of his species, and there was a strange peace in that certainty. Lisa reported that all ships were in position. Hayes confirmed that weapons were charged and ready, announced that engines were operating at peak efficiency. The crew was ready. The Alliance was ready. Humanity was ready. The only missing piece was Kate, who was still deep in the Sovereign's computer core, searching frantically for the activation codes that would unlock the ship's true power. Price and his Marines guarded her while she worked, prepared to give their lives to buy her whatever time she needed. Gave the order to attack. The Grand Fleet surged forward, thousands of ships accelerating toward the human defensive sphere. Plasma bolts and missiles filled space like a deadly rain, striking shields and hulls across the entire formation. Jake gave the order to return fire. The Sovereign's void lances carved through the first wave of attackers, erasing ships from existence with each shot. Alliance vessels added their firepower, destroying enemy craft by the dozens. But there were simply too many targets, too many threats, too many ways to die. The flagship was the first Allied vessel to fall. A concentrated barrage from 20 cruisers overwhelmed its shields and tore the ship apart. 300 rebels died in seconds, their sacrifice barely slowing the enemy advance. More ships followed. Human cruisers and destroyers fell one by one, their crews fighting to the last breath. The contingent was reduced to half strength within the first hour. The medical ships were targeted deliberately, a war crime that the Dominion did not even bother to justify. The Sovereign fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Its void lances fired continuously, ripping holes in space that swallowed ships by the score. Its fighters swarmed around it like angry bees, destroying any enemy craft that got too close. Its shields held against everything the Dominion could throw at them, bending reality to protect the ancient vessel from harm. But even the Sovereign had limits. 500 ships focused their fire on the simultaneously, and for the first time, its shields began to flicker. Warning lights appeared on bridge consoles. Guardian reported that shield generators were approaching critical temperature. Jake knew they were running out of time. He opened a channel to Kate's position deep in the ship. How much longer? Kate's voice came back, stressed but determined. I am close. There is a phrase hidden in the recording, something Admiral Wells embedded in the background noise. I almost have it. The Sovereign shuddered as a missile penetrated a momentary gap in its shields and struck the hull. Damage was minimal, but it was a reminder that even ancient technology could fail. Hayes intensified his fire, but there were too many enemies and not enough void lances. Watched the battle unfold with growing confidence. The human was weakening. Its allied fleet was crumbling. Victory was within his grasp. He ordered his reserves to advance, 500 fresh warships that would deliver the killing blow. Kate found the code. It was hidden in the harmonics of Admiral Wells's voice, a pattern of frequencies that spelled out words in an ancient Terran language. Kate did not recognize the language, but Guardian did. The phrase was simple and profound, something that every human child had once known. Per ad, through hardship to the stars. Kate spoke the words aloud, and the Sovereign transformed. Energy cascaded across the hull as systems that had been dormant for 50,000 years came online. New weapon arrays extended from hidden compartments. The engines pulsed with power that made the ship's previous output look like a candle flame compared to a sun. Guardian's voice changed, becoming deeper, more resonant, more powerful. Admiral, full tactical capabilities are now available. I must warn you that activating the primary weapon system will permanently drain the ship's power core. The Sovereign will save humanity, but it will never fly again. Jake did not hesitate. Do it. What happened next would be remembered for as long as humans existed to tell stories. The Sovereign released a pulse of energy that rippled outward at the speed of light, washing over every ship in the system. Human and allied vessels felt nothing, protected by codes embedded in their transponders. But ships were not so lucky. The pulse did not destroy them. It was more elegant than that. It simply turned off every electronic system aboard every enemy vessel simultaneously. 2,000 capital ships and 10,000 support craft went dark, their weapons silent, their engines dead, their crews alive but helpless. Supreme Commander found himself standing on a dark bridge, surrounded by officers who were screaming in confusion and fear. Emergency lighting flickered weakly. Life support continued on battery backup, but everything else was gone. A voice spoke through the ship's communication system, somehow still functional despite everything else being dead. Jake's voice, calm and measured, delivered a simple message. This is Admiral of the Sovereign. Your fleet is disabled. Your weapons are useless. Your engines are dead. You have two choices. Surrender unconditionally and withdraw all Dominion forces from conquered territories, or we will destroy every ship in your fleet one by one. You have 5 minutes to decide. Stood in the darkness and considered his options. 400 years of victory, 400 years of conquest, 400 years of never knowing defeat. All of it ending here, in a dark room on a dead ship, at the mercy of a species he had tried to exterminate. He could refuse. He could die with honor, taking his fleet with him to whatever afterlife the believed in. But death would not save the Dominion. It would only delay the inevitable. The humans had technology that could disable entire fleets with a single pulse. If they could do it once, they could do it again. Surrendered. The war ended not with destruction but with mercy. The Dominion from all conquered territories. Occupied worlds were liberated. Enslaved species were freed. The galaxy began the long process of healing from 1,000 years of tyranny. The sovereign landed on Earth for the final time, settling into a permanent berth beside the mountains where it had been discovered. Its engines were cold, its weapons silent, its power core drained beyond recovery. But Guardian lived on, connected to Earth's computer networks, sharing the knowledge of the Terran ascendancy with the descendants who had earned it. Admiral Jake retired 2 years later, passing command of the new Terran Defense Fleet to Lisa. He spent his remaining years teaching at the academy, sharing stories of the war with young officers who would never know the despair of those dark decades. Kate established the Institute for Ancient Terran Studies, dedicating her life to understanding the civilization that humanity had forgotten. She found records of worlds that had been lost, technologies that had been abandoned, and stories that had been erased from memory. Each discovery added another piece to the puzzle of human history. Hayes married Amy Porter, the communications officer who had wept for her family on New Haven. They had 3 children and named the youngest, after the admiral who had given humanity a second chance. And throughout the galaxy, on worlds that had known only oppression, beings looked up at the stars and told stories of the humans who had come from nowhere with weapons of legend. They spoke of the ancient ship that had awakened to save its children. They remembered the moment when the galaxy changed forever. Humanity had come home, and they would never forget where they came from or how close they had come to losing everything. The stars belonged to them now, and this time they would not let them go.